remote and secluded valley high in the Andes Mountains, far removed from the rest of civilization, there lay a strange and remarkable community. This valley, cut off from the outside world by towering cliffs and impassable glaciers, was home to a unique people. Many generations ago, a landslide had trapped a group of settlers within the valley, and over the years, their descendants had lost the ability to see. Blindness became their way of life, and over time, they had forgotten that sight had ever existed. To them, the idea of vision was incomprehensible, a mere fantasy, a meaningless concept that had no place in their well-ordered world. One day, a man named Nuñez, a mountaineer from the outside world, stumbled into this isolated valley. He had been part of a climbing expedition, but a terrible fall had separated him from his companions. Bruised and battered, he found himself wandering through an unfamiliar landscape, unaware that he had discovered a place unlike any other. As he descended into the valley, he noticed something strange. There were no signs of sighted life. The houses were built without windows, and the people moved about with an uncanny confidence, guided only by touch and sound. Nuñez soon realized that he had entered a community where everyone was blind. At first, he was fascinated, then perplexed. He watched as the people went about their daily lives, farming, cooking, and conversing with one another without any apparent difficulty. They had developed an intricate system of communication, relying on refined senses of hearing and touch. They spoke a language rich in sound-related metaphors, but completely devoid of any references to sight. The very concept of vision was alien to them, and when Nuñez tried to explain that he could see, they dismissed his words as the ramblings of a confused and irrational man. Determined to prove himself, Nuñez attempted to describe colors, shapes, and distances, but the villagers only laughed at him. They pitied him, believing he suffered from a strange affliction that caused him to perceive things that did not exist. They spoke of his delusions with gentle condescension, convinced that he was mentally unwell. In their eyes, he was the one who was disabled, not them. The elders of the community decided that if Nuñez was to live among them, he would have to be cured of his madness. He would need to learn their ways, forget his nonsensical talk of sight, and accept the truth as they understood it. Nuñez resisted at first, insisting that his vision was real. He tried to demonstrate his abilities by avoiding obstacles and describing distant objects. However, this only further convinced the villagers that he was suffering from a severe mental disorder. To them, his actions were erratic and meaningless. They did not understand why he moved so cautiously, why he flinched at things they could not perceive, or why he insisted on talking about a world they could not experience. Frustrated and isolated, Nuñez found himself torn between his knowledge of sight and the overwhelming certainty of the blind community. Over time, Nuñez grew accustomed to their way of life. He learned to navigate the village by touch, to communicate using their language, and to perform tasks in the way they had mastered. Despite his resistance, he began to doubt himself. Was it possible that his sight was an illusion? Had he been wrong all along? He struggled with his identity, caught between the world he had always known and the world that surrounded him now. As the seasons passed, Nuñez fell in love with a young woman named Medina Sarot. She was kind and gentle, and unlike the others, she did not treat him with disdain. She listened to him with patience, even though she did not understand his strange ideas about sight. To Nuñez, she was a source of comfort and acceptance, a reason to stay in the valley. When he asked her father for permission to marry her, the elders of the village deliberated for a long time. They saw Nuñez as defective, his mind clouded by delusions, but they recognized that he had adapted well to their way of life. Eventually, they agreed on one condition. The village doctor had observed Nuñez closely and had determined that his condition, was caused by two strange growths in his face. His eyes. If these growths were removed, the doctor reasoned, Nuñez would be cured of his affliction. He would finally be able to live in peace, free from the strange fantasies that plagued him. When Nuñez learned of this decision, he was horrified. The thought of losing his sight, the very thing that made him who he was, filled him with terror. Yet, as he looked at Medina Sarote, he hesitated. If he gave up his vision, he could belong. He could live without conflict, without being treated as an outcast. He could have a future with the woman he loved. Nuñez wrestled with his thoughts through the night. As dawn approached, he made his decision. He would not let them take his sight. He would not surrender the gift that set him apart. Quietly, he gathered his belongings and left the village, climbing back toward the mountains. It was a treacherous journey, and the cliffs loomed above him, threatening to swallow him whole. But he pressed on, determined to escape, determined to hold on to the truth of his own reality. As he climbed higher, the valley disappeared beneath him, swallowed by the morning mist. He did not know what lay ahead, whether he would find his way back to civilization or perish in the unforgiving mountains. But one thing was certain. He would not live in a world that denied the very essence of his being. He would not live blind in the country of the blind. Exhaustion weighed on Nuñez as he climbed higher, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was thin, and his body ached from the effort. He paused for a moment, turning back to look at the valley below. It seemed so peaceful, so perfectly ordered. Yet he knew that he could never belong there. The thought of never seeing the stars again, of never watching the sunrise over the peaks, was more than he could bear. A sudden crack echoed through the mountains as a rock shifted beneath his feet. He stumbled, barely catching himself on a jagged ledge. His heart pounded as he steadied his grip, his mind racing. He could not afford another mistake. One wrong step and he would fall into the abyss below. As the hours passed, the landscape grew harsher, the climb steeper. The wind howled around him, biting at his skin. But he pressed on, his determination unwavering. He thought of Medina Sarote, of the life he had almost chosen. Would she understand why he had left? Would she miss him? Or would she believe he had simply disappeared into the unknown? Lost forever? Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Nuñez crested the final ridge. Below him, the world stretched out in an endless expanse of light and color. Civilization lay somewhere beyond the distant horizon. He had done it, he had escaped. And though he was alone, though the journey ahead was uncertain, he knew that he was free. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to smile. He had held on to the truth of his own reality, and he would never let it go.